So it's getting very exciting in the book. They're on the Hogwarts Express, and Harry and Ron are talking to each other and getting to know each other. The Weasleys were clearly one of those old wizarding families the pale boy in Diagon Alley talk about. I heard you went to live with Muggles, said Ron. What are they like? Horrible. Well, not all of them. My aunt and uncle and cousin are, though. Wish I had 3 wizard brothers. 5, said Ron. But for some reason he was looking gloomy. I'm the 6th in our family to go to Hogwarts. You could say I've got a lot to live up to. Bill and Charlie have already left. Bill was head boy, and Charlie was captain of the Quidditch team. Now Percy's a prefect. Fred and George mess around a lot, but they still get really good marks. And everyone thinks they're really funny. Everyone expects me to do as well as the others, but if I do, it's no big deal, because they did it first. You never get anything new either. With 5 older brothers, I've got Bill's old robes, Charlie's old wand, and Percy's old rat. Ron reached inside his jacket and pulled out a grey, fat rat, which was asleep. His name's Scabbers, and he's useless. He hardly ever wakes up. Percy's got an hour from my dad for being made prefect, and they couldn't I got Scabbers instead. Ron's ears went pink. He seemed to think he'd said too much, because he went back to staring out the window. Harry didn't think there was anything wrong with not being able to afford an owl. After all, he'd never had any money in his own life until a month ago, and he told Ron so. All about having to wear Dudley's old clothes and never getting proper birthday presents. This seemed to cheer Ron up. And until Hagrid told me, I didn't know anything about being a wizard. My parents or Voldemort. Ron gasped. What? Said Harry. You said you know whose name, said Ron, sounding both shocked and impressed. I'd have thought you of all people. I'm not trying to be brave or anything, saying the name, said Harry. I just never knew you shouldn't. You see what I mean? I've got loads to learn. I bet he had voicing for the first time, something that he'd been worrying about a lot lately. I'll bet I'll be the worst in class. You won't be. There's loads of people who come from Muggle families, and they learn quickly enough. While they'd been talking, the train had carried them out of London. Now they were speeding past fields full of cows and sheep. They were quiet for a time, watching the fields and the lanes flick past. Around 12:30, there was a great clattering outside in the corridor, and a smiling, dimpled woman slid back their door and said, "Anything off the trolley, dears?" Harry, who hadn't had any breakfast, leapt to his feet, but Ron's ears went pink and he muttered that he'd bought sandwiches. Harry went out into the corridor. He'd never had any money for sweets with the Dursleys, and now he had pockets rattling with gold and silver. He was ready to buy as many Mars bars as he could carry, but the woman didn't have Mars bars. What she did have was Bertie Bott every flavoured beans, Drooble's best blowing gum, chocolate frogs, pumpkin pasties, cauldron cakes, licorice rounds, and a number of other strange things Harry had never seen in his life. Not wanting to miss anything, he got some of everything and paid the woman 11 silver sickles and 7 bronze knights. Ron stared at Harry and brought it all back into the compartment and tipped it onto an empty seat. Hungry, are you? Starving, said Harry, taking a large bite out of a pumpkin pasty. Ron had taken out a lumpy package, unwrapped it. There were 4 sandwiches in there. He pulled out one of the pot and said, "She always forgets I don't like corned beef." "Swap me for one of these," Harry said, holding up a pasty. "Go on." "You don't want this. It's all dry," said Ron. "She hasn't got much time," he added quickly. "You know, with 5 of us." "Go on, have a pasty," said Harry, who'd never had anything to share before, or indeed anyone to share it with. It was nice feeling sitting there with Ron, eating their way through all of Harry's pasties and cakes, the sandwiches they'd forgotten. "What are these?" Harry asked Ron, holding up a pack of chocolate frogs. "They're not really frogs, are they?" He was starting to feel that nothing would surprise him. "No," said Ron. "But the card is, I'm missing a gripper." "What?" "Oh, of course, you wouldn't know. Chocolate frogs have cards inside them. You know you collect them, famous witches and wizards? I've got about 500, but I haven't got a gripper or tomally." Harry unwrapped his chocolate frog and picked up the card. It showed a man's face. He wore half-moon glasses and had a large crooked nose and flowing silver hair, beard, moustache. Underneath the picture was the name, Albus Dumbledore. "So this is Dumbledore," said Harry. "Don't tell me you've never heard of Dumbledore," said Ron. "Can I have the frog?" I might get a gripper, thanks. Harry turned over his card and read. Albus Dumbledore, current headmaster of Hogwarts, considered by many as the greatest wizard of modern time. Professor Dumbledore is particularly famous for his defeat of the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945, for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon blood, and his work on alchemy with his partner Nicholas Flamel. Professor Dumbledore enjoys chamber music and 10-pin bowling. Harry turned the card back over and saw to his astonishment that Dumbledore's face had disappeared. He's gone! Well, you can't expect him to hang around all day, said Ron. He'll be back. I've got Morgana again, and I've got about 6 of her. Do you want it? You can start collecting. Ron's eyes strayed to the pile of chocolate fonts wanting to be unwrapped. Help yourself, said Harry. But in, Muggle world, people just stay in their photos. Do they? What, they don't move at all? Ron sounded amazed. Weird. Harry stared at Dumbledore and slided back. Harry stared as Dumbledore slided back into the picture on his card and gave him a small smile. Ron was more interested in eating the frogs than looking at the famous witches and wizards. But Harry couldn't keep his eyes off them. He soon not only had Dumbledore, Morgana, but Hengist of Woodcraft, Albrecht Gwynnin, Sere Parcellus, and Merlin. He finally tore his eyes away from the Druidess Claudania. If you remember, guys, when we did cults, they were Druids, who was scratching her nose to open a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavour beans. You want to be careful with those, said Ron. When they say every flavour, they mean every flavour. You get all the ordinary ones like chocolate, peppermint, and marmalade, but you also get spinach and liver and tripe. And George reckons he got a bogey flavoured one once. Ron picked up the green and carefully bit the corner. You see, sprouts! They had a good time eating every flavour beans. Harry got toast, coconut, baked bean, strawberry, curry, grass, coffee, sardine, and was even brave enough to the end of a funny green one wouldn't touch, which turned out to be pepper. The countryside, now flying past the window, was becoming wilder. The neat fields had gone. Now there were woods, twisting rivers, and dark green hills. There was a knock on the door of their compartment, and a round-faced boy hurried past on the platform 9 3/4 came in, looking tearful. Sorry, he said, but have you seen a toad at all? When they shook their heads, he wailed, I've lost him! He keeps getting away from me! He'll turn up, said Harry. Yes, said the boy miserably. Well, if you see him... He left. Don't know why he's so bothered, said Ron. If I'd brought a toad, I'd lose it as quick as I could. And you, I've brought scabbards, so I can't talk. The rat was still snoozing on Ron's lap. He might have died and you wouldn't know the difference, said Ron in disgust. I tried to turn him yellow yesterday to make him more interesting, but the spell didn't work. I'll show you. Look. He rummaged around in his trunk and pulled out a very battered-looking wand. It was chipped in places and something white was glinting at the end. Unicorn hairs nearly poking out anyway. He raised his wand and the compartment door slid open again. The toadless boy was back, but this time he had a girl with him. She was already wearing her Hogwarts robes. Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one, she said. She had a bossy sort of voice, with lots of brushy brown hair and rather large front teeth. We've already told him we haven't seen it, said Ron, but the girl wasn't listening. She was looking at the one in his hand. Oh, are you doing magic? Let's see it then. She sat down. Ron looked taken aback. All right, he cleared his throat. Sunshine, daisies, butter, melon, turn this stupid fat yellow. He waved his hand, but nothing happened. Scabbers stayed grey and fast asleep. Are you sure that's a real spell? Said the girl. Well, it's not very good, is it? I tried a few simple spells just for practice, and it's all worked for me. Nobody in my family is magic at all. It was such a surprise when I got my letter, but I was ever so pleased, of course. I mean, it's the very best school of witchcraft there is. I've heard. I've learned all our set books off by heart, of course, and I just hope it will be enough. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. Who are you? She said all of this very fast. Harry looked at Ron and was relieved by his stunned face that he hadn't learned all the set books off by heart either. I'm Ron Weasley, Ron muttered. Harry Potter, said Harry. Are you really? Said Hermione. I know all about you, of course. I've got a few extra books for background reading, and you're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. Am I? Harry, feeling dazed. Goodness, didn't you know? I found out everything I could if it was me, said Hermione. Do either of you know what house you'll be in? I've been asking around, and I hope I'm in Gryffindor. It sounds by far the best, and I hear Dumbledore himself was one. But I suppose Ravenclaw wouldn't be too bad. Anyway, we better go and look for Neville's toad. You two had better change, you know. I'll expect we'll be there soon. After she left, taking the toadless boy with her. Whatever house I'm in, I hope she's not in it. He threw his wand back into his trunk. Stupid spell. George gave it to me. Bet he knew it was dud. What houses are your brothers in? Harry asked. Gryffindor, said Ron, and gloom seemed to be settling on him again. Mum and Dad were in it too. I don't know what they'll say if I'm not. I don't suppose the Ravenclaw would be too bad, but imagine if they put me in Slytherin. That's house... you know who is in? Yeah, said Ron as he flopped back in his seat looking depressed. You know, I think the ends of Scabbers' whispers are a bit lighter, said Harry, trying to take Ron's mind off the houses. So, what do your oldest brothers do now that they've left, anyway? Harry was wondering what a wizard did once he left school. Charlie's in Romania studying dragons, and Bill's in Africa doing something for Gringotts, said Ron. Did you hear about Gringotts? It's been all over the Daily Prophet, but I don't suppose you get that with muggles. Someone tried to rob a high-security vault. Harry stared. Really? What happened to them? Nothing. That's why it's such big news. They haven't been caught. My dad says it must have been a powerful dark wizard. My dad said it must have been a powerful dark wizard to get round Gringotts, but they don't think they took anything. That's what's odd, because everyone gets scared when something like this happens in case you know who's behind it. Harry turned this news over in his mind. He was starting to get a prickle of fear every time you know who was mentioned. He supposed this was all part of entering the magical world, but it had been a lot more comfortable saying Voldemort without worrying. What's your Quidditch team? Ron asked. I don't know any, Harry confessed. What? Ron looked dumbfounded. Oh, you wait, it's the best game in the world. And he was off explaining all about it. The 4 balls, the position of the 7 players, describing famous games he'd seen with his brothers, and the broom set he'd like to get if he had the money. He was just taking Harry through the finer points of the game when the compartment doors slid open again. But it wasn't Neville, it was the toadless boy, or Hermione Granger this time. 3 boys entered, and Harry recognised the middle one at once. He was the pale boy from Madame Malkin's robe shop. He was looking at Harry with a lot more interest than he'd shown back in Diagonal Alley. Is it true, he said. They're all saying down the train that Harry Potter's in this compartment. So it's you. Yes, he looking at the other boys. Both of them, thick-set, looked extremely mean. Standing either side of the pale boy, they looked like bodyguard. This is Crabbe and Goyle, said the pale boy, carelessly noticing where Harry was looking. And my name is Malfoy. Draco Malfoy. Ron gave a slight cough, which might have been hiding a snigger. Draco Malfoy looked at him. Think my name's funny, do you? No need to ask who you are. My father told me that all the Weasleys had red hair and freckles. And more children than they can afford. He turned back to Harry. You'll soon find out that some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. He held out his hand for Harry to shake. But Harry didn't take it. I think I can tell who the wrong sort for myself are, thanks, he said coolly. Draco Malfoy didn't go red, but a pink tinge started to appear in his pale cheeks. I'd be careful if I was you, Potter, he said slowly. Unless you're a little bit politer, you'll go the same way as your parents. They didn't know it was good for them either. You hang around with riffraff like that, like the Weasleys and that Hagrid, and they'll rub off on you. Both Harry and Ron stood up. Ron's face was as red as his hair. Say that again, he said. Oh, you're going to fight us, are you? Malfoy sneered. Unless you get out now, said Harry more bravely than he felt, because Crabbe and Goyle were a lot bigger than him and Ron. But we don't feel like leaving, do we, boys? We've eaten all our food, and you still seem to have some. Goyle reached towards a chocolate fox next to Ron. Ron leapt forward, but before so much as he touched Goyle, Goyle let out a horrible yell. Scabbers the rat was hanging off his finger. A sharp little teeth sunk deep into Goyle's knuckle. Crabbe and Malfoy backed away as Goyle swung Scabbers around and around, howling, and when Scabbers finally flew off and hit the window, all 3 of them disappeared at once. Perhaps they thought there were more rats lurking among the sweets, or perhaps they'd heard the footsteps because a second later Hermione Granger had come in. "What has been going on?" she said, looking at the sweets all over the floor and Ron picking up Scrabbers by his tail. "I think he's been knocked out," Ron said to Harry. He looked closer at Scrabbers. "No, I don't believe it. He's gone back to sleep." And so he had. "You've met Malfoy before?" Harry explained about their meeting in Diagon Alley. "I've heard of his family," said Ron darkly. They were some of the first to come back to our side after you-know-who disappeared." "Said they'd been bewitched." "My dad doesn't believe it. He says Malfoy's father didn't need an excuse to go over to the dark side." He turned to Hermione. "Can we help you with something?" "You better hurry up and put on your robes. I've been up to the front to ask the driver, and he says we're nearly there. You haven't been fighting, have you? You'll be in trouble before we even get there." "Scrabbers had been fighting, not us," said Ralph, scowling at her. "And would you mind leaving while we change?" "All right, I only came in here because people outside are behaving very childish, racing up and down the corridors," said Hermione in a sniffly voice. "And you've got dirt on your nose, by the way. Did you know?" Ron glared at her as she left. Harry peered out of the window. It was getting dark. He could see mountains and forest under a deep purple sky. The train did not seem to be slowing down. He and Ron took off their jackets and pulled their long black robes. Ron's were a bit short for him. You could see his trainers underneath. The voice echoed through the train. "We'll be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes' time. Please leave your luggage on the train. It will be taken to the school separately." Harry's stomach lurched with the nerves, and Ron, he saw, looked pale under his freckles. They crammed their pockets with the last of the sweets and joined the crowd thronging in the corridor. The train slowed right down and finally stopped. People pushed their way towards the doors and out onto the tiny dark platform. Harry shivered in the cold night air. Then a lamp came bobbing over the head of the students, and Harry heard a familiar voice. "First years! First years over here, all right there, Harry." Hagrid's big hairy face beamed over the sea of heads. "Come on, follow me. Any more first years? Mind your step now. First year, follow me." Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was so dark, either side of them, that Harry thought it must be thick trees there. Nobody spoke much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffed once or twice. "You'll get your first sight of Hogwarts in a second," Hagrid called out over his shoulder. "Just round the bend here." There was a loud "ooh." The narrow path had opened suddenly on the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop of a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. "Not more than 4 to a boat," Hagrid called, pointing to the fleet of little boats in the water and the straw. Harry and Ron were followed in their boat by Neville and Hermione. "Everybody in?" shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. "Right then, forward!" And the fleet of little boats moved all at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer to the cliff on which it stood. "Heads down!" yelled Hagrid, and the first boats reached a little cliff. They all bent their heads, and the little boats carried them through a curtain of ivory, which hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel, which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle, where they reached a kind of underground harbour, where they clambered out onto rocks and pebbles. "Oi, you there, is that your toad?" said Hagrid, who was checking the boats as people climbed out of them. "Trevor!" cried Neville blissfully, holding out his hands. Then they clambered up onto a passageway in the rocks after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto the smooth, damp grass, right into the shadow of the castle. They walked up to the stone stairs and crowded the huge oak front door. "Everybody in? You still got your toad?" Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. So I'm going to stop there. Remember to write a summary. And we're going to be actually inside Hogwarts, which is very exciting. And we're going to be catching up to where I got to with my class when we were reading in school. All right, goodbye, guys.